Hi, everyone, and welcome to our distance learning lesson 2, solving inequalities. I know that we've had more than 2, but this is our second one in our new unit 4B. I decided to switch up my location a little bit so you have a slightly different background. There's a lovely photo of the Duomo behind me. So make sure you get up and move and change locations every once in a while. Give yourself a different view. So, let's start with our do now. I want to give you a reminder that you will be uploading your notes to Google Classroom. So make sure you are staying organized, date it, label it as needed. So here's your first problem. I'm going to pause the video and let you try this on your own. And you're going to input the values into the interactive in this play pause it. And then after that, I'll go over it. So read the question. Best of luck. So here's the solution to the first question. So we're asked what's greater than 1. X must be greater than 1. And this is a review of our graphing inequalities. Now we can use logic, or we can also look at our graph right here. And we can see that the 3 is within the solution. It's in the solution, so 3 is a solution. 700, that's going to be way down there, so that's also a solution. 1.05, it's the smallest amount, but it's also past 1. Now, -3 is down here, so that's a no. And 1 lands on 1. But what we see here is an open circle. And as a reminder, an open circle means we don't equal that value. And that also is shown here in the inequality. X is greater than 1. It's not saying we can be equal. It's strictly greater. So when I asked you to name 2 more values, you could have chosen anything. You could have chosen 1.0001. That's greater than 1 by a very little bit. You could have chosen 7,625. That's greater than 1 by a lot. So there's infinite possibilities you could have chosen. Okay, here is problem 2 for your do now. So again, I'm going to pause and give you a moment to try it on your own. So the number line becomes really important when we're dealing with negative numbers because it gives us a visual. Now, again, notice that this graph uses a closed circle, which says that we can be equal to that value, can be equal, because as we see, it's greater than or equal. That's why -2 is a solution. 1 is up here, so that's a solution. And -1.95 is just there, but that's in the solution as well. -4 is right there, not in the solution. -6 is going to be there. So when we choose, you can choose any positive value is going to be greater than a negative. And for the negative values, it has to be between -2 and 0. So maybe -1.5. There's my negative value. And my positive value, I'm just going to put 37. Okay, so let's go on to the objectives for today. So our 2 objectives are to review how we graph the solution of inequalities. We just started doing that a little bit with closed and open circles. And then we're going to look at what are the differences and similarities to solving equations and inequalities. So let's go on. So here's our recap. So I'm going to ask you to first graph the solution to these 2 values. So do that in your notebook before you take a look at the answer. So here are the 2 solutions to those inequalities. How'd you do? Did they match up? Now I'm going to quickly talk about some of my requirements for graphing inequalities. What you will see is I always have the 0. You must have a 0. It shows me that you understand where the other numbers are in reference to 0. Then you must have that limiting factor, that barrier. So 5 for this one, -3 for that one. You can then go by ones, by twos, by tens, whatever you need to in order to accurately reflect it. Notice that I'm using a open circle here to show that I don't equal 5, and I'm using a closed circle here because I can equal -3. Now I'm going to quickly pick a value, say 7 for my first one, and I'm going to plug it in. 7 is greater than 5. Well, that's correct. So it's just a nice way to know I'm correct. I'm then going to pick, say, -5 for this one and say, okay, -5 is less than or equal to -3. That also is correct, so I'm feeling confident. We have 2 more practice problems for us with some nice recap. So this time, you have the inequality, the graph, and I want you to write the inequality. Make sure you read the instructions carefully to input your answer correctly. So here are 2 solutions to practice problem 3 and practice problem 4. Again, hopefully you use the correct variable, as I said, to use h for 3 and p for 4. What we look is we notice, again, the open circle. So when it's open circle, you have 2 options. It's going to be the greater than or less than. Versus a closed circle, our options are going to be greater than or equal or less than or equal. So you have a 50-50 chance, and then what we realize is that the values are greater than 4, so any value h must be greater than 4. We use the same logic to then realize that based on our graph, we're under 3, but we can be equal because it's a closed circle. So that's our recap from last lesson. Let's go on to solving inequalities now. Oh, actually first, so that's our conclusion. This is something we've been stating in all of those, the open versus closed circle, and how to do it. If you need to, just take a moment and pause to add this to your notes. If you feel comfortable on this, we're now going to go on to solving inequalities. So we're going to do some group exploration, even though we're not together. But here's our first takeaway to solving inequalities, and you should really add this to your notes, really important. Solving inequalities, you isolate the variable, just like we learned when solving an equation. We're going to use inverse order of operations. Inverse order of operations. You may remember that we used an acronym, SADMAP. Oh, spelled SADMAP wrong. To help us when doing so. Now I'm going to ask you to solve the given inequality, graph the inequality, and then choose a value shown in the solution to ensure accuracy. I have 2 examples and then 2 practice. So here's example 1. So again, I always like to write SADMAP to ensure I'm doing it correctly. So I'm going to start, and I realize I have a multiplication and an addition that I need to undo. Well, the addition occurs first, so therefore I'm going to subtract 3 from both sides. Now this is going to take some work because I need a common denominator. I'm going to do that over here. 23 thirds minus, well, I need a thirds, 3, well, that's 9 thirds. 9 over 3 is 3. So all of a sudden I get this, subtract 23 or 9 from 23, and I get 14 thirds. So now I have 4 thirds x greater than or equal to 14 thirds. I'm going to divide by 4 thirds, which is the same as multiplying by the reciprocal, which is therefore 3/4. Well, I can actually see that the 3's cancel out, and I end up getting x is greater than or equal, well, 14 over 4 actually simplifies further to 7/2, which is actually 3.5. x is greater than or equal to 3.5. So let's make this graph bigger so we can see it. I'm going to put 0 here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Well, that means right here is 3.5. I have to do a closed circle. Greater values are over here. But remember what I said part C was. So this was part A, solving. Part B was graphing. Part C is test. So we're going to test. I'm going to just pick 5. Now, when we test, we go to the original. So my original is 4/3 x plus 3 is greater than or equal 23/3. Actually, you know what? Instead of picking that, I'm going to pick 6 because 6 is going to be a nice number to do. 4/3 times 6 plus 3. Well, that becomes a 24/3, which is just 8. So this is 8 plus 3, because I did that over 1. This is an 11 greater than or equal. Well, is 11 greater than or equal to 23/3? Well, 23/3 is the same thing as 7 2/3. So yes, it's good. Let's go on to practice 2 now. So we're going to start by solving it. Let me zoom out again. And for solving it, don't forget that there's implied parentheses here. So I multiply by 2 first. I get x plus 7 is less than 16. Subtract 7. I get x is less than 9. So that's my part A. Part B, let's graph this. I'm going to go by 3s. So I'm going to say that this is 0, 3, 6, 9, 12. An open circle because we're less than. My arrow is going this way. I'm going to test in the original equation now. I'm just going to pick 3. So I'm going to go 3 plus 7 all over 2 is less than 8. Let's see if this works. I get a 10 over 2 is less than 8. A 5 is less than 8. Perfect. That works. So, again, pause this if you need to write this down. But if you're ready, here are your 2 practice problems. So I'm going to pause it, and you're going to complete them in your notebook. So here are the answers to those 2 practice problems. Notice that practice problem 5 required me to have a closed circle, whereas practice problem 6 required an open one because it's strictly greater than. I chose the value 0 because it was in the solution for practice 5, which gave me 7 is less than or equal to 28, which is true. You could have chosen a different one. And I chose 18 for practice problem 6, which gave me 108 is greater than 81. Again, you could have chosen a different one. All right. Now, let's look at 2 different ones. Now, these have negative values, which we weren't really dealing with in the previous one. So let's see if anything happens differently. So let's start by solving it in exactly the same way. So minus 5, minus 5. Negative 4x is greater than or equal to 20. Divide by negative 4, divide by negative 4, and I got x is greater than or equal to negative 5. So let's go and graph this. So I'm going to say 0, 1, 2, negative 1, negative 2, negative 3, negative 4, negative 5. Well, okay. I'm going to graph it now. I have a close circle, I go greater, and well, let's now test a point. So this was part A, this was part B, and now we're doing C. Now, based on my graph, well, 1's a solution, so I'm going to test 1. -4 times 1 plus 5 is greater than or equal to 25. -4 plus 5 is greater than or equal to 25. 1 is greater than or equal to 25. Well, that's not right. That's wrong. 1 is not greater than 25. Well, this is the one difference between equations and inequalities. And this is our second takeaway. When dividing or multiplying by a negative, flip the inequality sign. So I'm going to go through now and we're going to fix that. So let's see. According to this, I need to erase this. It was a greater than or equal. I'm going to flip it to be less than or equal. So I go to my graph, and instead, now I'm less than, which goes this way. Well, according to this, I can now pick the value, say -6. So let's test what happens when I plug -6 in. Well, I get a 24 plus 5. I get a 29 greater than or equal to 25. This is now correct. So this is the key takeaway. Make sure you pause the video and you write this down if needed. Let's take a look at a second example that would require us to do this. So here we go. I have multiplication here because it's -3 times. This is in parentheses, I do last, so I start by dividing both sides by -3. Well, I just divided by a negative. My less than or equal becomes a greater than or equal. 6 divided by -3, -2. Add 2 to both sides. Oh, look at that. X is greater than or equal to 0. So this is part A I solved. Because it's 0, I'm just going to put in some numbers there to show that I understand how it works. I need a closed circle. Greater than or equal is to the right. Let's now test. Well, let's test with 1. -3. 1 minus 2. Less than or equal to 6. -3 times -1. Less than or equal to 6. 3 less than or equal to 6. Yeah, that works. So don't forget when we divide or multiply by a negative. Notice we divided by -3. It doesn't matter what this is. What matters is what we're dividing by. I'm going to go up for a second. We divided by a -4. Let's go up further. We divided by a 3. I divided by a 9. It doesn't matter what the other value is. It's what you're dividing or multiplying by. So here are 2 practice problems. Again, do them in your notebook, and the answers will come up afterwards. So here are your answers to practice problems 7 and 8. Now notice that it was originally a less than, but then I multiplied by a -3, so I flipped the inequality to result in a greater than. Over here, It was originally a greater than, and it continued to be a greater than because I subtracted 6. That's not what makes me flip it. But then I divided by a -3. It doesn't matter that that -15 was there. It's because I divided by a -3, I flipped it to less than. Then I was able to graph both of them. They both had open circles. I chose -4 to test for my first one, and I chose 2 to test for my second one. You could have chosen different ones. But either or, it would show me that these are the correct graphs and that I accurately solved it. The test is to make sure I solved it. It might remind you, hey, I forgot to flip the inequality sign. So if you need to pause this and make sure you add this to your notes, do so, because remember, you have to upload your notes at the end of this lesson. So in conclusion, this is what we do when solving inequalities. We isolate the variable, which is what we're familiar with. And when dividing by or multiplying by a negative, flip the inequality sign. Those are the two big takeaways from today's lessons. Now, on the assignment sheet and on Google Classroom, there is practice. There's about 8 questions. What you are going to do is you're going to complete them in your notebook and then upload a photo of your work. I expect to see a part A, B, and C for each. So solve, graph, test. If you have any questions, message. If it's during class, just message me on Google Hangout or come into the Google meeting. If it's not class time, then make sure that you send me an email with as much detail as possible. Bye, everyone.